Welcome one and all to the Hammer Territory podcast presented by Fox One. It's a pleasure to be with you once again. A little rusty, but it's good to be back in the saddle here with my podcast partner, Stephen Tolbert. Stephen, let's spoiler alert. We don't have much news to really talk about, but we're in the midst of the World Series. It's been a good World Series so far, but there's still plenty to talk about since the offseason has started for us and 27 other teams. We're going to get into what I think is a pretty important topic for this Braves offseason. Nothing that's going to make or break the offseason, but could make it a bit more successful if they hit on some moves we're going to talk about. But as always, Stephen, good to be with you, sir. How you been? Hope all's well. And I'll go ahead and get it out of the way. Congratulations to your Alabama Crimson Tide.
What's up, buddy? It has been a minute. It's been 10 days. I don't know how long it's been since the last time you and I did a podcast. Probably the longest it's been in a couple of years since the last time you and I talked. I
think this is the first time we've done a Sunday show together, but yeah, it's been quite a while. Good seeing you again, man.
Yeah. So, Bama did beat Tennessee. You were out of town. We didn't get to talk. We've talked a couple of times since, obviously, but it was a good game. I've said it to you privately. I thought it was a better game than the final score indicated. But yeah, it was a good game. At least for us, it was a good game. We do have an interesting topic tonight, and there's not a ton of news to talk about. So we decided, you know what, the names that you've been hearing in terms of, Braves, free agents, potential targets, it's all kind of the big names. That's kind of the list that everybody dream on, right? Dylan Cease and Cody Bellinger and, Hassan Kim, like that's what everybody talks about. Devin Williams. So what we decided to do tonight was go a little bit more under the radar. Maybe if those options aren't there, the Braves have to maybe go to like plan B or C. Who are some potential guys that could have value is kind of the idea of tonight's show. Because you do have to have that. You can't just say it's this guy or bust because you might not get him. So you do have to have backup options. And we stuck with free agents because we never know who's available in trade. Of course, trades are always available, but these are going to mainly be from the free agent list of just guys that we like that potentially have some upside, maybe aren't that, the most expensive guys, but think could potentially help the Braves in 2026.
Absolutely. And, again, shortstop, starting pitching, the bullpen, those really are the areas where the Braves want to focus because those are the clear needs of this team. And also, as we've discussed previously, a few weeks ago, there's likely more area to add value via pitching than there is the position player aspect of the team because you've got so many of your starters locked in long term. But that doesn't mean that value cannot be added because there's two clear reasons why I feel the Braves should be targeting not only specific names potentially under the radar, but specific roles. And those two roles are utility player, a guy that you can rely on to, either play multiple positions within a week or potentially fill one spot for an extended period of time if you were to have injuries, but also that fourth, fifth outfielder role, some guys who, could be a starter, again, if you have an outfield injury, or could, fill a platoon if you, for some reason, had to go that route, or just spill a guy or give a guy, a day off, which, I think would benefit the Braves, more days off for the starters. But there are two big reasons why these under the radar names should be a bigger priority than some may think for the Braves this offseason. And one big reason why, it's a stat that we've mentioned before, but I think it's a stat, like if you want to talk about all the stats where the Braves struggled this past season, this one stood out to me the most. When you combine the offensive production of center field, shortstop, and second base for the Braves in the first half of last season, it was a 54 WRC plus. The only team that had a worse number up the middle in terms of offensive production in the first half was the Rockies, who had an historically bad season last year. We talked all about it, how Ozzie Albies, Nick Allen, and Michael Harris at one point, for months were among the, three of the 15 worst offensive players out there. So having another guy that can give those guys a day off, or having another guy who could just, potentially fill in for a little bit of time for those guys as they make adjustments, that's what you really need from a potential utility guy, because again, you can't have a third of your lineup being among the worst producers in baseball. So having another option that you could trust to give your starter a day off or a couple of days off would really be beneficial.
Yeah, and so that's, our list of names is essentially gonna be guys who play middle infield or guys who play in the outfield or slash DH. It's always tricky with center field and shortstop because those are just such specific defensive positions. It's very hard to find players who can play those positions and play them well. That's why I think Eli White is actually a pretty important piece to bring back for Alex in the offseason. He's obviously arbitration eligible, so they can just tender him a contract. And I really hope they do. I think his contract number is like $1 million. So I really hope they do because he can play center and he can actually play shortstop in an emergency like we saw last year. But yeah, I mean, the Braves just need more infield depth. I mean, we've said that for 2 years, 3 years now, ever since they lost Dansby. Like they don't have a ton of infield depth in the minors, especially up the middle, shortstop specifically. They did draft a bunch last June or last July, but it's going to be a couple years before those guys are ready. So the Braves could always use more infield depth. They did go claim a bunch of guys, Vidal Brujan, Nick Allen, Brett Wisely, but even then, I think you probably need another level. Obviously, the goal is to get Hassan Kim. That's the goal. But again, this show is okay. Let's say somebody goes and offers Hassan Kim at a crap ton of money. Where can you go to get something serviceable at shortstop? And that's probably going to be the first guy we talk about. And then just more depth up the middle. And so that's going to be kind of the tenor of tonight's show.
Well, it's not only lack of offensive production, but it's also availability, which may be the biggest reason of all. Because if you look at 2024 and you look at 2025, you look at both those years, you've had your starting third baseman, your starting second baseman, your starting center fielder, your starting right fielder, your starting left fielder, and your starting catcher. All six of those guys for the Braves have missed at least 40 games, either in one of those seasons or in both seasons. So
Yeah.
it's very likely that you're going to see someone that you're expecting major contributions from to be absent for an extended period of time in 2025. So if that's the case, either you a utility guy or an outfielder, someone that could step up, yeah, fill out a DH role every now and then, maybe not play every day, but someone that you could trust to be at a starter level's worth of production for an extended period, that's got to be a priority for this Braves team because of all the injuries that we've seen. I know many have talked about the starting pitching and, the bullpen going through injuries, but our position players, injuries, it's not the reason why, it's not the reason for the underperformance, but it's still a major factor in the Braves falling short of expectations over the past few years. So you have to get more trustworthy sources as pivots if you were to lose a guy for an extended period of time.
Yeah. And I'll say this before we get to the list. There's probably not going to be anybody that we can talk about that's going to be as impactful as Austin Riley turning back into Austin Riley, right? And Ozzy Albies turning back a little bit into Ozzy Albies. You know, health matters, of course. Those guys have to stay healthy, but when they've been healthy, they also just haven't been hitting at the level that we expect, especially Austin. So, and relative to contracts, it really is Austin, right? I mean, he's making 20, he's the highest paid player on the team, like, or he is at this point. We'll see how the offseason goes, but like they just need more from their current guys. Like, yes, there's outside guys they can get to help, and that's what we're talking about tonight, but like nothing's going to help as much as Austin Riley turning back into an all-star and Ozzy Albies turning back into at least a semi all-star. Michael Harris not being the worst hitter in baseball for the first 4 months of the season. Like staying healthy and getting some of these guys to raise their floors back up to levels that we kind of expect instead of, this thing where they just drop way, way, way below anything we expected them to do, even when they're in, a slump. That's going to be the big part. So yes, we're going to mention some outside guys they should bring in, but we'd be remiss if we didn't say the big improvement can also come internally from guys just getting back to their talent level.
Absolutely. Yeah. And none of the guys that we're going to mention, here later on in the show, none of these guys we are expecting to come in and be a major offseason acquisition that is an obvious upgrade for this Braves team. We're putting out a list in this show of guys who can fill in when the guys that you need to be their regular selves just aren't available, or if they're struggling. Because, hey, perhaps a little bit more rest for our regulars could help lower the chance of injuries or could help keep them fresh to be able to perform at their usual levels. But again, just some guys out there, free agents, under the radar names, so guys that probably have struggled, over the past year or two, but the Braves have had a great time under Alex Anthopoulos of being able to rekindle some value in guys who struggled, in previous stops before the Braves. We're going to get to those names in just a moment after a word from our partners.
The NBA season tips off, and so does DraftKings' newest fantasy game. DraftKings Pick 6 is the easiest way to play for big wins, with every possession giving you a shot at real money. Here's how to play. Just pick more or less on 2 or more stats and unlock the upside every game brings. Pick 6 is available in Texas, California, Missouri, and more. New DraftKings customers get $50 in bonus picks with just a $5 entry on your first pick set. Don't just watch basketball, cash in. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code FOUL. That's code FOUL. Play just $5, get $50 in Pick 6 bonus picks. Make the call, ride the upside in partnership with DraftKings Pick 6. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 and over. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. 1 per new customer. Bonus awarded as non-withdrawable Pick 6 bonus picks that expire in 14 days. Limited time offer. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
Welcome back to the Hammer Territory podcast presented by Fox One. So let's get into some of these names, some free agent names. Again, this isn't plan A, this isn't plan B, not even plan C. These are just some free agent names that potentially they're out there later in the offseason. They could be brought in at a pretty cheap contract. We know Alex Anthopoulos loves opportunities that he feels has a good chance of adding value. These are some names that could be at the right price to do exactly that. Now, we're first going to talk about some utility guys who have shown the ability to be able to handle multiple positions during seasons in their careers, outfield, infield, what have you. A big caveat to this of what type of utility guy the Braves may go after is, can he handle shortstop? And a lot of that will hinge on whether or not the Braves sign Ha-Seong Kim. Even if the Braves do sign Ha-Seong Kim long term, I still think these 3 guys make sense to bring in, again, to give guys a day off or to be there when the likely occurrence of an injury happens. So, Stephen, let's get into some of these names. If I were to throw out a few boxes to check for a potential free agent signing, a guy that can play multiple positions, a guy that's had some offensive success in the past, maybe struggled last year, but has shown signs that he could be rekindled, could be regain some value in Atlanta, and someone that is a veteran who doesn't need to play every day, but will be ready to step up in a starter's role if needed. Who's a guy out there in free agency that you think meets that criteria?
Yeah, so the first guy I kind of brought to this discussion is, I'm going to lay out the scenario first. Ha-Seong Kim gets paid a crap ton of money by somebody, and you Braves lose him. And they don't want to run back Nick Allen and his 50 WRC plus. Shortstop is just a wasteland of, just not a lot of talent out there. Let's just say hypothetically there's no trades. Colorado has no interest in trading their guy. Trevor Story doesn't opt out of his deal. Bo Bichette signs a monster deal somewhere else. There's just nobody. Where do the Braves go? And the guy I thought of first is Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. So he's played with Toronto this year. And is he great? No, he's not great, but he is going to be a free agent. He is a really good defensive shortstop, which checks the first. That's the first box that Alex is going to want. If I'm not going to get a premium hitter, then I better have somebody that can field. And IKF can field his position. He can play shortstop. Offensively, he's not good, but he's not Nick Allen bad. And I want to make sure we make that clear, because oftentimes we group bad hitters together. There are levels of bad. Nick Allen is the worst hitter in Major League Baseball. That's the level. Like Nick Allen legitimately hits at the same level that like Max Fried used to hit when pitchers were still hitting in the National League. Like he's legitimately the worst hitter in baseball. IKF is not a good hitter, but he's not that. He's not Nick Allen. Like the last 2 years, if you look at 2024, 2025, IKF has an 85 WRC plus between those two seasons. Again, not good, but a guy that can play that position, can play short, is not going to cost a ton of money. That's still like 30, 35, 40% better than Nick Allen in terms of offensive production. Now, again, that's not where the Braves should aim. This is not who we think the Braves need to go after primarily. This is plan A and plan B fall through the plans don't work out. Where do we go from here? I think IKF makes a lot of sense for this team. He's just a really good defender and he can hit. He's not a complete nothing at the plate. You can dream on a little bit, like, he had in 2024, he had a 93 WRC plus. In 2020, he had a 93 WRC plus. Like, you could actually get a season where he could be around, and if you get that with a guy who's playing good shortstop, you take that all day long. What you can't have is the guy who's the worst hitter in baseball. So that's the level we're trying to get. So is he better than Ha-Seong Kim? Absolutely not. The Braves need to go hard. They need to go aggressively after Ha-Seong Kim. But again, if somebody just blows his contract out of the water and the Braves have to go somewhere, I want to hear what you think about it. But I think IKF could be interesting.
No, I think that's, it would be an excellent signing. And then again, IKF, even if they do sign Ha-Seong Kim, IKF can play in the outfield. He could spell Ozzie Albies at second base. Because don't forget, Ozzie Albies, I know that he had a good second half to the season, but he's out with the same injury that spilled over, with the same injury that was likely a factor in him struggling so badly in the 2025 season. What if Ozzie Albies comes back again and struggles in the 2026 season as well due to the injury that he had at the end of this year? IKF's the type of guy that can doesn't have to play every day. You plug him in, you're going to get decent to good defense, and likely you have some tools that you can work with to make the offense better. So I think it's a very, very good potential signing for the Braves if they were to get IKF. A name that I like, and someone that you and I have discussed multiple times before when it came to the Braves clearly needing to upgrade their shortstop position, is Willi Castro. He played with the Twins for much of his career, and then I believe at the trade deadline this year was traded to the Cubs. Someone that can handle shortstop pretty well. His range fell off a bit this year. Definitely has one of the better arms in terms of infielders in baseball, but someone who has also kind of fallen off a bit when it comes to his offense. He had over 100 WRC plus in 23 and 24, dropped down to a 92 in 2025. But again, if the Braves just simply had someone that can handle shortstop on occasion, but also could just, again, have that OPS in the 650 to 700 range, have an 80 or better WRC plus. That is so much of an upgrade from what they had in Nick Allen. But Willi Castro can play all around the diamond. Again, he can handle shortstop. I think that he definitely has shown that he has some hit tools that you can, re-up some value in his overall offensive approach. And another thing with Castro, he can add some value on the base pass as well. So I think that if he's, in the market potentially for a prove-it deal, a one-year deal, I think that he would be a good signing. I think that he potentially becomes more of a focus if for some reason the Braves don't sign Kim, but I would not at all mind the addition of Castro this offseason.
Yeah, Castro, so he obviously was with the Twins. He got traded to the Cubs at the trade deadline, had a brutal stretch with Chicago. His last 2 months really drug down his overall numbers. Other than that, he's been a really good player. This is a guy that you and I talked about last offseason when we were trying to figure out shortstop yet again. I will say he played a lot more shortstop in 2024 and played it better than he did in 2025. I think he only played like 6 games at shortstop in 2025. He can do it. He just had a better year last year. And listen, that's the same with IKF. I need to mention that. Like, I think IKF was a -2 outs above average at shortstop last year. I think Castro was something similar, but again, Castro didn't play shortstop much in 2025. So you'd have to project a little bit, and the Braves could do that. He's still young enough where he could play the position. But again, when you're talking about your plan C, your plan D option, it's not bad. I mean, that's not a bad place to go. And again, he had such a bad stint with Chicago that that might suppress his market. That might suppress his free agent market. You might be able to get him at a good price. You need to be able to get these guys at a good price. If you're going to be, on your third option at that position for the offseason, at the very least, you need to get him at a good price. So I think Castro is a decent name for something like that.
And then, so say the Braves do, get one of their big, if not their biggest need taken care of, and they sign Ha-Seong Kim, here in the coming days, maybe weeks. The sooner it happens, the better, obviously. But a name that doesn't necessarily, come into play for shortstop, because I think that of these three names we mentioned, he's the least reliable there. But someone that can, at least adequately filling around the infield and the outfield. But I think also has clearly the highest upside with the bat as a utility option for the Braves to bring in. It's Luis Rengifo of the Angels, someone that has done really well at the plate 2022, 2023, 2024. All seasons he had 100 WRC plus or above. 23 and 24, 115 or above WRC plus. More contact than power, but does hit for a little bit of power as well. Had a bad year in 2025, fell off 73 WRC plus, but someone who I think clearly does. His expected stats were clearly better than his actual results. He has those he's the type of target for the Braves in free agency where, like Ramon Laureano being the latest example, once the Braves bring him into the fold, he's someone that could really improve, even to the point of potentially being a DH option on occasion as well. So Luis Rengifo, I think, probably is my favorite target out of these guys because of the offensive upside, but also the ability to fill in as needed if again, the Braves were to see a significant contributor or starter falter or succumb to injury for an extended time.
Yeah, this is my favorite name as well on this list. Again, this kind of assumes that you take care of shortstop with Kim, because Rengifo is not a shortstop. But I'm going to read you off what positions Rengifo played last year. Played 76 games at third base. He played 74 games at second base. He played 7 games at right field, 2 games in left field, 1 game at shortstop, 1 game at center, 1 game at DH. So they moved him all around. And he did not have a good offensive year last year. He had a 73 WRC plus. But again, his expected numbers. So in 2024, Rengifo had a 118 WRC plus. In 2025, he had a 73 WRC plus. So he obviously had a big drop. But in 2024, so Rengifo actually had a better expected numbers in 2025 than he did in 2024, even though his 2024 results were better. So 305 expected OBA in terms of the expected numbers, which is solid for like a utility type guy. Like there's something you can, I'm not going to say dream on because it's not like it's a prospect, but there's something that you can kind of believe in if you sign him. It's not going to cost a ton of money to sign him. He plays all over the diamond. Again, this signing Rengifo would assume that you solve shortstop somewhere else, but I think this guy is just better than like the Brett Wisely, Vidal Brujan, Nick Allens of the world. He's just got more. There's more potential. He's a switch hitter, which helps, everywhere. It just help balance the lineup. You can move him all over the place when you have inevitable injuries, like you were talking about at the beginning, Shawn. The Braves do not have the most trustworthy collection of players in terms of staying healthy. So having guys like this that can play all over the diamond and can switch hit and have at least enough offensive upside to dream on, I think this is something the Braves need to look at pretty substantially. And out of these 3 names, again, this is not a shortstop, so you have to solve that elsewhere. But in terms of fit to the roster, being able to play everywhere, being a switch hitter, Rengifo is probably the guy I like the most out of these 3 guys.
And let's not, throw it to the side here. He's played for the Angels for his career so far. If there's a team that the Braves know well, it would be the Angels for all the moves of Perry Maniason and Ron Washington being there. So you probably would expect that this name has come up at some point, with the Angels. So I'm sure that the Braves, know who he is. But yes, so if we were to see later on in the offseason or even early in the offseason, we were to see the Braves, potentially sign, Rengifo to a deal, and you're thinking, this guy? be excited because he's the type of guy that I think he's the type of underrated signing that could come in and you could really see the Braves create value in him because of the offensive upside that he has shown. But it's not just utility players where the Braves are hoping to, where the Braves could hope to potentially find new sources of value, new sources of success. The outfield could also be an option as well. And we'll get to those in just a moment. But before that, we want to talk about a news source as well. It is the sponsor of our show, and that is Fox One. Of course, Fox One has been the sponsor of our show throughout much of October. And one thing is definitely true when it comes to Fox One. It is the best place for you to watch what we have all been waiting for, and that is the World Series. Two teams take the field, but only one will leave as champion. Every swing could change the game. Every play could make history, and there's no better place to stream the World Series live than Fox One. Of course, while we're recording the show on Sunday, the World Series will resume in LA on Monday, Game 3 on Monday, Game 4 Tuesday, Game 5 Wednesday, Game 6 is Friday, and Game 7, if needed, will be Saturday. And Stephen, when you're looking at this World Series, are there any headlines that are really standing out to you? Series tied at 1, going back to Los Angeles. What stands out to you so far from what we've seen in the World Series?
Yeah, really fun 2 games in Toronto. Watched them both from start to finish. Obviously, the Blue Jays bats just dominated Game 1. Barger at that grand slam. Blake Snell was not sharp. Game 2 was a completely different story with Yamamoto. He was just dominant. I mean, he just shut that lineup down. The Dodgers finally got off the board with some homers. I think Will Smith homered, Max Muncy homered. You know, it hasn't been like the big, like Shohei Ohtani's been awesome, but like Freddie Freeman, Mookie Betts, I think are both having pretty pedestrian playoffs. It's been kind of the other guys, and it's been the Dodgers pitching when they've been right. Of course, Blake Snell had a rough Game 1, but yeah, going back to LA for Game 3, tied 1-1. It's no guarantee that we're going back to Toronto at any point. Obviously, there's 3 games now in LA. If LA wins all 3, the series is over. It would be kind of funny if it did go back to Toronto for Game 6 or Game 7, because that would mean the season didn't start or end in America, obviously, because baseball plays those early games overseas now, and then obviously Game 7 would end in Canada. But yeah, it's been a fun series, and I can't wait. I really hope Toronto does what they did in Game 1 and just beats the piss out of the Dodgers. That's what I'm rooting for. But Dodgers are very good. Dodgers pitching is so deep, and of course they've got Ohtani. And so when you've got those things, it's going to be tough. But yeah, next 3 games are in LA, and yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and the thing is that, again, I know everybody, talking about the Dodgers ruining baseball and all that different stuff. LA is a great postseason setting, and it's because the Dodgers are just so consistently there. But man, if you want to talk about postseason settings, Toronto in that Game 6 and Game 7 in the ALCS was incredible. Going back there with Toronto having a chance to win the World Series at home would be awesome for many reasons. And so that's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that it goes to a Game 6 and hopefully a Game 7. And for you, beyond the World Series, which is what we're talking about, Fox One is still a great source because you can check out Big Noon Kickoff, NFL on Fox, and much more on Fox One. As we show down here in the banner, start your 7-day free trial today. Offers are subject to change. Go to Fox One for complete terms and conditions. And again, of course, this is Hammer Territory presented by Fox One. Thank you so much for joining us. We're in the midst of going through a list of some underrated, under the radar free agent candidates when it comes to the Braves. And so want to switch now to really the outfield. And again, we talked in the first segment about, how the Braves struggling up the middle in the first half of last season, the Braves struggling with injuries. That's why it's so important to have a utility option. But there also is ways that the Braves can go about potentially lowering the risk for injuries, especially when it comes to Ronald Acuna Jr. And as Steven and Scott talked about a few weeks ago, with Marcell Ozuna now a free agent, the Braves bringing in just a traditional, bat-only DH probably isn't the smartest thing for this lineup, because it's going to be smart to use that DH position to have some of your regular position players get a little bit of rest by filling that DH position themselves, like Ronald Acuna Jr. So another focus for the Braves when it comes to under the radar targets is an outfielder, someone that may not be able to play every day, but could play 100 or so games during the season as an outfielder, DH, what have you. And there are some names out there that I think could make some sense, some familiar names, but also some names that I think, if they come to Atlanta, could regain some offensive value as well, because they'll improve their production.
Yeah, so we're going to start this list with a familiar name, somebody that I've talked about on this show probably too many times to count, actually. I talked about a bunch last year, and that's Michael Conforto. So Conforto did not have a good year results-wise in LA. He had an 83 WRC plus this year, which is obviously well below average and certainly well below his standard. He was actually left off the World Series roster. It tells you what kind of year he had. But I'll say this: his expected numbers were about 60 to 70 points higher than his actual numbers. He had a 341 expected OBA last year, which is very high. He's still very talented. He's got a ton of pop. I've always thought that Conforto in Truist Park is a tremendous matchup. Very similar to Profar, actually. I just think he could really take advantage of that short porch. Now, listen, Conforto is not a good defender. Neither is Profar, of course, and that didn't bother them at all. I think, and I've said this before, I think the Braves should aim higher than Conforto. Again, I want to make that point again. This is not our plan A for anybody. This is options dwindle. You need a plan C. Where do you go to? Conforto had a rough year with the results. Should be pretty affordable. The expected numbers were really good. He still got power. He still takes walks. I think he'd be a great fit in Truist. And I think that the Braves could rotate him, Profar, and Acuna in right, left, and DH, which I've talked about a bunch on this show. I think that's the way the Braves need to go to not only help on DH, but to protect Acuna and Profar, keep them healthy, keep them out of the outfield so much. And I think Conforto could be a low cost, high potential pick. I just think he's talented, and it is a little biased because I've always wanted the Braves to go after Conforto. But when and I knew that he had a bad year in LA, but when I saw those expected numbers, I was like, he's still got it. Somebody is going to take a chance on Conforto at a really cheap contract, and I think he's going to have a big bounce back year. And I would hope I kind of want it to be the Braves. I want the Braves to aim higher than Conforto, but if they ended up with Conforto, I would actually get pretty excited. Expected numbers aren't everything, of course. It's not a prediction of what's going to happen in the future, but it's, again, something you can kind of hope for. Like there's actual tangible things there that, like, all right, there's potential that this guy could still have it a little bit in terms of the bat. So it's an interesting name to me.
Is, we were talking about these guys. It feels like that we're redoing a podcast, from a year ago, and that we're talking about two of the same guys. Of course, Michael Conforto signed a 1-year, $17 million deal with the Los Angeles Dodgers before the 25 season. Another guy who was there as well, I believe he signed either a 1-year, $8 million or 1-year, $10 million deal with the Philadelphia Phillies, was Max Kepler. And Max Kepler actually had a pretty decent season. It is sub 700 OPS, but a 90 plus WRC plus. 18 home runs, though, for the Phillies. Someone that can play the outfield still is pretty decent defensively, but I think he's someone that can make a lot of sense. Probably is looking again for another 1-year deal, trying to put together a really good season to maybe get a multi-year deal, one last big multi-year deal like Conforto. There's a lot of similarities between a Max Kepler as well as a Michael Conforto. And one of the biggest reasons why it would make sense is just look at the difference that Drake Baldwin and Jurickson Profar made at the top of the Braves lineup from their ability to consistently put together good at-bats, whether it's taking walks, whether it's taking pitches, making adjustments, being able to fight off pitches, what have you, just consistently putting together good at-bats. Both Conforto and Kepler take walks. They can work counts. Taking that type of option and putting it in the bottom of the lineup before you turn over to the top of the lineup, that would be another valuable addition for this Braves team. So I think Max Kepler, still in his early 30s, if he could come in on a one-year deal, potentially put together, maybe somewhere between an 80 and 100 WRC plus, 20 homers. We know the Braves need more homers, and give Jurickson and Ronald off days in the corner outfield spots. I think that would be a very valuable signing for the Braves. And again, we talked about these guys just a year ago. The Braves once again saw that type of guy is needed for this roster. Why not go out and add at least one of them?
Yeah, Kepler is another guy that his expected numbers were just substantially higher than his actual numbers. He had a 90 WRC plus, like you said, but again, he had kind of a 40-point underperformance in terms of what he should have done. And I know I keep using these expected numbers. I don't use them just because I like them. I use them because Alex Anthopoulos has shown in the past that they care about these numbers. And anytime you see big underperformance relative to what was expected, the Braves consider that value and they consider that interesting. And they've actually gone out and acquired players for that very reason, because they had, a season that was probably less than what their expected numbers said they should. So they were going to be cheap, but there was high upside. Kepler, Conforto, Rengifo, like these guys have that profile, which Alex has shown in the past that he likes. So it's not just us saying this. The front office has just done this in the past. And Kepler is another guy. Kepler is a better defender than Conforto. So Kepler would certainly help more. Neither one of them are good defenders, but Kepler is better. Conforto is very close to a DH player. Like, you would have to live with some bad defense on the days that Conforto's in left. Kepler is much more similar to probably Acuna, maybe Profar. Profar is pretty bad though. I mean, honestly, the Braves have shown they don't really care about corner outfield defense. I don't really care that much about corner outfield defense. I've gone on that rant before. As long as you hit at a certain level, first base, left field, right field, like, I can live with some bad defense out there. It's up the middle. You got to be careful. So yeah, Kepler's another name that I like. I think there's upside there with the expected numbers he had in 2025.
And there's familiarity as well, right? Conforto, played a lot of his career with the Mets. Max Kepler last year was with the Phillies. So the Braves have seen up front how these players perform, and that familiarity, we know that Alex likes that familiarity. So I think that either one of those guys makes sense. One other name that I mentioned before and that, I feel could make sense, not even to the level of a Conforto or a Kepler, because he was bad in 2025. That's Lane Thomas. Lane Thomas, again, another former NL East guy, was with the Washington Nationals, was traded to the Cleveland Indians at the 2024 trade deadline. Jeff Passan had mentioned himself before he was traded that Lane Thomas was someone that the Braves had interest in for multiple seasons. And we've seen the fact that Alex, if there's been, reporting out there that he's had guys that he's been interested in the past, couldn't get them in the past, as their value goes down, maybe he picks them back up in time. So that's something that surely could happen with Lane Thomas. But again, Lane Thomas is a guy who I think could make some sense for this Braves squad. Not a lot of hope with the expected numbers, but perhaps he could come in and be a reclamation project. However, there's a strong arm in the corner outfield that he can provide, and he also, again, could be an excellent addition on the base pass. Late game pitch running option, incredibly fast guy in the 90th percentile when it comes to sprint speed. So again, this maybe not a minor league signing, but this is like plan, IJK if a lot of other things don't fall in place. But the Braves have had past interest. He's had past success. I think he's someone that could fill some needs for the Braves. So Lane Thomas is another guy who I would not mind the Braves kicking the tires on later in the offseason after they've either already checked a bunch of boxes with needs that they have, or perhaps a need that they weren't able to address. Maybe they feel he could address it.
Yeah, I'm going to read you Lane Thomas's results over the last 5 years. In 2021, he had a 104 WRC plus. Very good. 2022 had a 98 WRC plus. 2023 had a 109 WRC plus. 2024, he had a 99 WRC plus. 2025, he had a 48 WRC. I don't know what happened last year. Like a dude that had just consistently shown that he's like a league average or even slightly above hitter, just fell off the planet. And so if you go get Lane Thomas, what you're kind of hoping is 2025 was the outlier and we're going to return back to, 2021 through 2024 production, where he is a league average or slightly above league average hitter with really good speed. He's not going to kill you in the outfield. You just got to hope maybe he was hurt in 2025. Maybe he didn't like Cleveland. You're banking on 2025 being kind of a mirage in that he's going to return back to form. It's not a terrible bet because we do have like a 4-year chunk of sample of him being a really good hitter, not a really good hitter, but a solid hitter, a decent hitter. And then we have one kind of outlier season that says he's not. So that's not a bad gamble, especially since you're probably going to get him at like league minimum or maybe even a minor league deal, like you said. Like there's strong value there. There is upside play, which is what we're looking for here. We're looking for guys who aren't going to cost a lot of money, but still have upside play. With the other guys we talked about, they had really good expected numbers last year. The results just weren't there. With Adams, it is literally just, he was terrible last year. Maybe that was just an outlier. And the 4 years before that were really good. And we're going to bank on that. But it's not going to cost us a lot of money. So I could see it. Like I could see the Braves doing Lane, I could see him doing him just, I keep saying Lane Thomas. I do that every single time I talk about this guy. I say Lane Adams, Lane Thomas. His name is Lane Thomas. There are different people. Lane Thomas had a really bad 2025, but he had really good 4 years before that. So we'll see. I could see them doing that. I could see them doing a couple of these combined, actually, now that I think about it. Like I could see them doing like Rengifo and Lane Thomas. Again, it's not going to cost a lot of money. That's kind of why we went with these guys. That's what under the radar means. It means these guys are not going to get headlines. If the Braves sign them, no one's going to we'll talk about it, but no one's going to like freak out. But there's hidden value with all these guys. Thomas just happens to come from, you have to ignore 2025 and go 2021 through 2024. Lane Thomas, people. His name is Lane Thomas. I apologize to the Thomas family. I don't know why I call you Lane Adams. I've done it my whole life. Ever since you got into the league, I call you Lane Adams. Lane Thomas.
Yeah, and again, we're talking about signing these guys for 1 year and not at a lot of money either. We're talking about signing these guys for prove-it deals. And hey, it could work out like Ramon Laureano did. The Braves didn't even sign Ramon Laureano before the 2024 season. They signed him in the midst of it. They should have picked up his option. They declined it. He signs a 2-year, $12 million deal last offseason, plays with the Orioles, then goes to the Padres. Ramon Laureano, because of the retooling that he did in Atlanta, I'm not going to say that's the sole reason, but his time in Atlanta clearly made him a much better player than before he was. Last year, among players with 400 plate appearances, he was top 20 in WRC+. He killed the baseball for much of the season. So it could work out that way. It also could work out like Alex Verdugo did in the 25 season. But again, because it's not a lot of money involved, nor is it a long-term contract, it's okay to take that chance. And that's why we're mentioning these names. So if you see the Braves sign a Willi Castro or a Luis Rengifo or Lane Thomas or a Max Kepler, again, it's not the expectation is not for this guy to all of a sudden turn into 2023 Marcelo Zuna. It's just making the options better. It's giving the Braves an alternate source that they can go to in the case that there's underperformance or injury once again from the starters, and then this person can step up and hopefully deliver better than where they had in previous stops because of the success the Braves have had in helping hitters re-up their value in time.
Yeah, and you said it. Like sometimes you get Ramon Laureano, sometimes you get Whit Merrifield, and then sometimes you get Brian De La Cruz, and sometimes you get Alex Verdugo. Like, it is a bit of a crapshoot, but that's why teams do it, because there's so little risk, because you're signing these guys to very, very manageable contracts. It's not, there's no $100 million deal here. There's no 5-year deal here. Almost certainly 1-year contracts. A couple of them will command more than league minimum, but a couple of them will sign for league minimum or sign it. Lane Thomas is probably going to sign a minor league deal, to be honest with you. I called him Lane Thomas that time, so that was a win. So yeah, it's very low risk. And that's what Alex loves. All teams. So many things in baseball are high risk. These kind of moves are low risk. Teams love them. So, there's value here, and there's potential value, and there's potential upside. And that's what you got to look for when you're at plan C, plan D, plan E. You don't maybe have the guy you want. You at least have to try to aim for some sort of upside. And I think all these guys we talked about tonight have some sort of upside. You can look at something in their numbers that says, all right, if the stars align perfectly, we could get a Ramon Laureano out of this situation. And it doesn't work all the time, but it's not a bad bet to make.
And we're labeling these guys as under the radar. Maybe you could label them as undervalued. Maybe you can rate them as underrated. For some, it may be underwhelming. We get that.
Yeah.
But if there's one thing to potentially bet on, it's the Braves track record. Again, I know we've mentioned this ad nauseum at times in some of our podcasts, but it should stand out. The Braves have had a very good track record, one of the better track records over the past decade of bringing in guys who had past success elsewhere, but in recent years it's struggled. But once they came to Atlanta, they were able to re-up some of their offensive value. If the Braves could get one or two of these guys to come in and do that once again, that's the type of development that could really help the odds of you returning to where you want to be as a contender next year. These are the type of signings that could help you do that if they work out. Steven, anything else from you as we wrap up this edition of the Hammer Territory podcast presented by Fox One? Wrap up this edition of the podcast. Anything else from you, sir?
No, just, we're at pretty much the last week of the season. The World Series is probably going to wrap sometime this week. I think even Game 7 would be, it might be Monday. Saturday. It could be Sunday. Yeah. So very good chance this is the last week of the baseball season. And just remember, 5 days after the World Series, boom, everything gets going and we will get plenty of news. So this could kind of be the last, this upcoming week is probably going to be the last week where we're still kind of in wait and see mode. After that, the offseason is going to get going. So there's going to be plenty to talk about.
And there's going to be more than likely plenty to talk about because you got more needs for Alex Anthopoulos, the manager, plus plenty of additions to the team that need to be addressed. He likes to act quickly. Of course, in mid-November, we're going to be on awards watch, especially when it comes to NL Rookie of the Year. Obviously, Matt Olson as well in the running for some awards. So plenty to look at when it comes to the Braves. One more week, then hey, the content should be up and roaring, and we will be here to cover it for you as always. For Stephen Tolbert, my name is Shawn Coleman. You can find both of us on X/Twitter, Hammer Territory, on all forms of social media, part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts. Until next time, go Braves. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Hammer Territory podcast.